Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Rethinking Performance Reviews to Improve Outcomes, presented by Engage2Excel. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webinar has been pre-approved for IHR certification credits, 1 HRCI webcast recertification credit, and 1 HRCI e-learning credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast to receive your credits. If you're joining us live today, you'll receive an email from hr.com within 1 to 2 business days that will include your certification credit information. You can also log in to hr.com and go to your My Certifications page where you can see the credits you've received and also find out about our recertification program and e-learning webcast pass. If you have any questions today for our presenters or for hr.com, please type them into the Questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel and we'll be sure to follow up with you. And it's now my pleasure to turn you over to Engage2Excel.
Thank you, Sylvie. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Rethinking Performance Reviews to Improve Results. I'm Melissa Munier. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager here at Engage2Excel, and I'll be assisting with the questions that come through along with my teammate, Tyler Morrison. Just a few things we'd like to cover before I introduce our speakers. We'll be answering as many questions as we can. However, if we're unable to answer yours during our webcast, we'll respond to you via email within 36 to 48 hours. Also, as a reminder, a PDF version of the slides shown today and a recording of the webcast will be available on hr.com, and the recorded version will be available on our website, engage2excel.com, within 24 hours. So today's webcast features Jeff Gelinas, VP of People and Product at Engage2Excel. Jeff has over 15 years of experience in HR and product management. His experience includes his former position of Director of Product Management at IBM Connexa and HR and Staffing Leader at Connexa for the Talent Management Practice. We also have Emily Gatton. She's the Vice President of Engagement Solutions at Engage2Excel. She brings over 10 years of experience in program design, implementation, training solutions, and solutions management. In her current role, she designs performance-based recognition and reward programs for leading national brands in the fields of healthcare, manufacturing, consumer goods, food services, transportation, and energy. Our agenda today includes the discussions on why traditional performance reviews don't work, how do we improve the employee manager experience, performance-based recognition practices, and we conclude with key takeaways. Now, I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Jeff Gelinas.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I think we have a really exciting agenda planned. I thought that we would kick this off. Again, thank you so much for the introduction, and Emily, thanks to you as well for joining in on this very important topic. I thought we'd kick it off with a polling question to get to know our audience a little bit better. And Melissa, if you could launch that, that would be terrific. The polling question has to do with where your organization stands with regard to rethinking performance management. So we're going to get that started and see what our audience has to say. Melissa, I don't know if I'm seeing the polling question.
Sylvie, could you help us?
Okay, the poll is open and the results are coming in.
Great. So again, the question is, where does your organization stand with regard to rethinking performance management? So it's reviewed and updated in the past 18 months. That's option A. Currently evaluating is B. Plan to review in the next 18 months is C. No plan to review is D, and E is not applicable.
Okay, we've had about 81% who have answered, so I'm going to close the poll.
Awesome.
And now I'm going to share the results. And Jeff, if you open up the polls, the plus sign on your control panel, you'll see the results there, and the audience is seeing them now.
Awesome. So it looks like we've had about 22% who have reviewed and have updated in the past 18 months. 37%, that's actually the highest number, are currently evaluating. We have 19% who plan to review in the next 18 months. Hopefully, for those of you, we'll give you some good tips to take away. 16% of you have no plans to review, and then 6% are not applicable. It's interesting to see these statistics, Melissa. There was a Burson report that asked a very similar question in 2014, and about 39% at that time had planned, of the individuals surveyed, had planned to review in 39% within 18 months. So it's interesting to see how the number has shifted. We had more people in the currently evaluating phase than existed a couple of years ago.
Exactly.
All right. So let's dive into our topic at hand. So before we get into why traditional performance reviews don't work, let's talk a little bit about some relevant HR trends that will help us as we tackle this topic. And I want to begin by talking about some of the current labor market realities. There's a lot of buzz about millennials, and as you probably know, millennials are now the largest generation represented in the workplace today. And you have more and more millennials entering management positions. With 5 generations in today's workforce, certainly HR departments are looking at how to motivate different groups of employees, knowing that a one-size-fits-all approach simply won't work. We also have work habits changing. So for example, more and more jobs offer telecommuting, at least on a part-time basis. And with millennials demanding flexibility and mobility, this trend is surely to continue. The nature of work is also changing. In the 2016 Burson by Deloitte Human Capital Trends Report, it mentions that the U.S. government has declared that 40% of workers now have contingent jobs, and that figure will continue to grow. In that same report, it mentions that 92% of organizations say that they're not organized correctly to do the business they're in. Furthermore, best-in-class organizations are challenging the traditional hierarchical approach to management. We also see increased competition for skilled workers, especially as unemployment rates continue to decrease. In June in the U.S., it was just 4.9%, and this just isn't just in the U.S. European countries like the UK and Germany are also experiencing comparable unemployment rates. You also see increased diversity in the workforce, which is really making organizations look inward at their culture and the employee experience they seek to create for that diverse employee base. All of this boils down to the fact that HR really needs to rethink its strategy, and the challenge is that change is happening at such an accelerated pace. All of these realities certainly get my heart racing, as I'm sure they do for you, but with some thoughtful strategies, organizations can get in front of this wave. Coupled with these new market realities, employee engagement, as many of you know, is a very hot topic, and the evidence is greater than ever that engagement really does matter. So here are a few facts that we assembled for you from a recent PwC study. The first is that companies with highly engaged employees enjoy 33% higher profits, which again really speaks to the business impact that engagement can have. 51% lower turnover with satisfied employees, an increase in performance-related business outcomes by 2.5 times, and a 27% lower rate of absenteeism. These are some very compelling numbers. So it's no surprise that the employee experience is a top priority. And as we look around, we see companies making a heavy investment. Google is a great example. It has been very purposeful about building a culture that focuses on transparency to maximize the employee experience, and several companies are doing the same thing. And it needs to go deeper than offering employees flexibility or exceptional benefits. Millennials especially want to feel that connection to the organization. So HR leaders really have to be thoughtful about their approach. All right, so now that we understand a little bit about the trends happening in the market, let's talk about performance management, and in particular, performance reviews, and why the traditional approach doesn't work. So here are the most common pitfalls. They're often conducted annually. They're typically formal in nature, where the manager or supervisor schedules an often lengthy meeting to cover everything in the time allotted. The manager is often influenced by recent events. So for example, if there are recent performance concerns or strengths, those events make it really hard for the manager to think objectively about performance over the entire period. It's often one way, and if the manager is doing most of the talking, it's not mutual. And the research shows that they actually have a negative impact on engagement and performance. In fact, research conducted by Kansas State University, Eastern Kentucky University, and Texas A&M revealed that rather than motivating employees to improve, annual performance reviews had a negative influence on employee perceptions and engagement levels. And then lastly, a lot of managers try to sum up the entire conversation and end with a performance score or rating. And when employees know that that conversation will end with a performance score or rating that will later impact compensation, guess what? There's a lot of anxiety, and the focus is not on the feedback being given. And Melissa, before we move on, I believe we have another polling question that we wanted to ask here.
Yes, we do, and that is now available to the audience.
Perfect. So what percentage of companies believe their existing performance management process is worth the time put into it? So A is 0 to 19%, B is 20 to 39, C is 40 to 59, D is 60 to 79, and E is 80 to 100%. So it looks like we're at about 56% voted. You guys are voting very quickly, which is awesome. And we're a little over 70%. We'll give it another 5 seconds or so. All right, we're at about 77% voted. So Melissa, I think we can close the poll. And here are the results. So looks like 19% of you think it's in that 0 to 19%. 40% of you believe, that's the highest number, believe it's in that 20 to 39% range. 24% of you said 40 to 59%. 15% of you said 60 to 79%. And then a very low number, only 2%, believe it's in the 80 to 100%. Well, the first group, 19% of you said 0 to 19%. That is actually the correct answer. In a recent Burson by Deloitte report, only 12% believe that their existing performance management process is worth the time put into it. Wow. Furthermore, 58% of companies believe their performance management process is weak in driving engagement and high performance. That statistic came from Forrester. And lastly, according to another Burson by Deloitte report, 50% said it was of no use at all. These are some pretty discouraging numbers. But when you look at the effectiveness of traditional performance reviews, these beliefs really shouldn't shock us. About 2 out of 3 appraisals result in either no performance change or a decrease in performance. This is why companies like Adobe, Accenture, GE, Google, Microsoft, and dozens of others have abandoned their annual performance reviews. According to Laszlo Bock, SVP of People Operations at Google, he said performance management as practiced by most organizations has become rule-based, bureaucratic process existing as an end in itself rather than actually reshaping performance. Employees hate it, managers hate it, even HR departments hate it, end quote. So we know that the traditional approach doesn't work. Let's talk at a high level about how to transform your philosophy. And I say philosophy because it may, depending upon your organization's culture, really require leadership, managers, and employees to have a new way of thinking. So before we go into some of the considerations, I really want to emphasize that engagement needs to be at the heart of your philosophy. And there are a lot of definitions out there. In this definition, we say that employee engagement is the extent to which employees are motivated to contribute to organizational success and are willing to apply discretionary effort to accomplishing tasks important to the achievement of organizational goals. And I think the key language is really around willingness to apply discretionary effort. I think a lot of us are here to understand what that secret sauce is to create an environment where employees are inclined to apply that discretionary effort. And we know that there are engagement-related performance challenges, and that's because employee engagement does have a direct impact on the business metrics, whether it's productivity, customer service, quality, or safety. There is a direct impact. And to go to a step further, a positive or negative impact on all of these metrics in turn affects the business's bottom line. So if you think about customer service, for instance, because I know that we've all had either a positive or negative experience as a customer in our personal lives, think about how a disengaged employee helping customers today can be so incredibly harmful to business, especially when we live in a time where it's so easy for customers to socialize their experience via social media, for example. So the bottom line is that employee engagement undoubtedly impacts an organization's business performance, and so that's why engagement needs to be at the heart of your philosophy. If you happen to join us on our webcast on September 28th, you learned about Dr. Jack Wiley's respect framework, which is based on 30 years of data around what employees most want from their employer and the link to engagement and performance. Respect is an acronym that stands for what employees most want from their employer, and that is the following: recognition, exciting work, security, pay, which is primarily fair pay, education and career growth, conditions, both positive and social, and truth, primarily from senior leadership. Not surprisingly, 25% of people say that fair pay is their number one want, but after that comes recognition at 20%, and the bottom line is that people want to feel appreciated. We're going to be providing everyone attending today with a handout that links back to this respect framework, giving your managers tips for how to engage employees and give them what they want in their everyday conversations. Let's pause for a moment here before we move on. I just want to see if we have any questions coming in. Tyler, how are we doing on questions?
Hi, Jeff. We do have one question for you. Is the respect information provided based on global research?
Yes. So the respect research that we've done actually spans 25 years, beginning in 1988. They were drawn from a number of countries, I believe 12, including Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and so on. It also captures all of the major generational gaps, job types, in major industries. Good question. All right. So earlier in the presentation, we talked about some of the pitfalls. Let's talk about how you can do it right so that we can help our managers motivate employees. And here are some recommendations for your managers and team leaders. And I mentioned team leaders in light of our earlier conversation about the changing nature of work. A lot of work today is happening in teams, and so in many cases, a team leader may have a better understanding of individual performance than an actual manager or supervisor. So when I talk about manager, certainly could be a team leader as well. The first motivator is making the conversation informal. So managers need to make it feel like it's a conversation. And if you think about the setting that your managers or team leaders are in, that certainly matters too. So try to choose a setting that isn't overly formal. I know that confidentiality and privacy can certainly come into play, but try to get creative so that you're creating a comfortable setting for the employee. Second, employees appreciate fairness and accuracy. So managers need to come into the conversation with facts and data points that really shows that they know their stuff. The third is making it mutual. As I mentioned earlier, at the end of this presentation, we're going to give you a handout with some great questions for managers and supervisors to ask employees using the respect framework that we just discussed. Next, and this really speaks to the art of delivering feedback, we need to let employees know where they stand without providing a formal rating. And I like to think about it in terms of 3 areas. Either an employee is exceeding expectations, they're meeting expectations, or they're not. So for example, let's pretend that you were having a conversation with a high-performing employee, Susan. You could say something like, Susan, I want you to know that I really value your contributions, and I consider you to be among our highest performers. Or if she were simply meeting expectations, you could say, Susan, I've really enjoyed talking with you today, and I want to reiterate that you are continuing to meet my expectations. Or if her performance were needing improvement, you could say, Susan, I really need to work with you to put together a plan to get your performance back on track. There are absolutely subtle ways that you can let employees know where they stand, to be transparent without providing a formal performance score or rating. That's very, very important. And then the last is demonstrating personal interest. I mentioned earlier that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work, especially as we went through some of the changing demographics in the workforce today. So know your audience. Know what makes your employees tick. Millennials, for instance, they really like to understand how they fit into the mission and vision of the organization. And then finally, are there things happening outside of work, hobbies, personal goals, or other interests that you're aware of that you can weave in? I'm a big fan of mental models and frameworks, simple frameworks that can help. And here I break down the different components of the performance management lifecycle. The first is connect. And this is particularly important for millennials, as we've discussed. Managers must make sure that the individual work links to the organization's mission and its success. People need to see how their efforts impact the success of the organization. Help make that connection. Help your managers make that connection. The second is measure. So while we're largely talking about performance reviews in this webcast, Rethinking goal setting should also be something that you're thinking about. There's a lot of evidence as well that annual or long-term goals simply don't work. I recommend quarterly, as this allows you to be more nimble as business priorities shift throughout the course of the year. In my experiences in various organizations, quarterly goals have worked really well, and it allows employees to really think about a shorter period of time in terms of accomplishing those goals. And the third is manage. And as a team leader or manager, it's about giving and receiving feedback. It should be ongoing. And as you see positive or negative behaviors, that's an opportunity to talk to employees. A little later in the presentation, we're going to break down this manage section and give you 5 steps that you as HR professionals or those joining us as a manager can help really build out a new program. And the last is develop. At the end of the day, I think we all want our employees to be their personal best. And as we saw in the RESPECT framework, education and career growth is one of those key elements of what employees most want from their employer. So let's take a moment to compare and contrast some of the points that we've made. In purple, you see the traditional approach of setting goals one time throughout a given period and then having a performance review or appraisal at the end of that period. As we've discussed, this negatively impacts engagement and is not aligned to today's work environment. Instead, we've talked about more regular and informal feedback coupled with coaching and development. One of my critiques, and there's a lot of research out there by some of the big HR analyst firms, one of my critiques is that in terms of their recommendations, they don't specifically call out recognition. And I've invited Emily Gatton, a recognition solutions expert, to talk about how adding performance-based recognition can improve outcomes. It's not a replacement, but it's something that adding to your program can really help. Because we know that performance management is a means to an end. So I talked about earlier, it really shouldn't be the end itself. It's really a means to higher engagement and business performance. And I think in listening to Emily's overview of performance-based recognition, I hope you'll see how adding it to your organization in this philosophy will help you get to that same objective and give employees something that they really want in the process. Not to mention helping HR and managers get some really valuable data points on their employees. And with that, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I think we have a polling question as well.
We do. Thank you, Jeff.
All right. So, Melissa, we might need your help in launching the next polling question.
It has been launched and the attendees can see it.
Awesome. So do you work for an organization that recognizes employees for displaying positive behaviors, values, or performance-based outcomes? So yes, no, or not sure. And Emily, it looks like people are responding pretty quickly. We're over 70%. And fantastic, we're at about 80% who have voted.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
I think there's
We'll go ahead and display the results. So wow, overwhelmingly, 68% say that you do work for an organization that recognizes employees, which is great. 24% no, and 8% not sure. And I think that as Jeff discussed, and we're going to speak about in just a few minutes, recognition helps provide that continuous development, the ongoing feedback, reinforcement of positive behaviors throughout the year. It can significantly improve the employee's experience when they receive that feedback and ultimately produce better results. So first, let's spend a few minutes discussing why recognition matters and how that may enable, or assist in your performance management strategy. When designed effectively, recognition is an essential enabler to business strategy. It communicates, supports, and reinforces the specific behaviors that dictate success. If you think back a moment to that performance management life cycle, the first step is connect, where you want to connect the individual's work to the organization's mission and success. And recognition and your recognition strategy can do just that. A fully integrated recognition solution and strategy provides employees with a unified purpose, encouraging them to work together to achieve common goals. Think of a game of tug-of-war. Imagine that your team members were blindfolded and then each handed a strand of a larger rope. If you disorient them, even to a slight degree, you can see how difficult it would be for your team to work together toward that common goal, toward the common purpose. And I believe the same is true in the workplace. I've seen too many times where employees may have the talent or the best intentions, but they simply need someone to point them in the right direction, show them where they're going, what you want them to accomplish, and then list specific behaviors that can help them get there. A recognition program can communicate that strategy and direction and reward employees for working together to achieve success. Next, let's review the 7 principles for performance recognition. I believe these statements are virtually universal truths that are important to remember when evaluating recognition strategy. First, businesses don't create value. Your people do. Second, values are important, but they don't drive performance. Behaviors do. And I want to pause here for just a moment. Certainly companies spend a great deal of time and effort when defining their values, and I don't want to discount the importance of them. But if you think about when you're coaching managers or speaking to employees on how to align themselves with the business strategy, it's important to make your values meaningful and relevant. If you provide specific behaviors, maybe rather than a larger construct, then it can communicate exactly what you need each person to work towards. For example, a value of integrity is noble, but employees in a distribution center need to understand what integrity means for their role. How can they show that? And that will likely be different than integrity in your finance department. Specific behaviors can bring your values to life. We'll review a few examples in a minute, but let's continue. Number 3, your organization's culture and goals are unique. 4, engagement levels vary widely within different parts of your organization, and as such, your strategy may need to be a little bit different in different areas. Number 5, since your goals and culture are unique, one-size-fits-all programs are not effective at improving performance where and when it matters most. 6, I'm sure you will all agree with this, absent C-suite support, any change management initiative is likely to fail. And number 7, leaders often lack the time and expertise to effectively communicate with, motivate, and recognize employees to drive exceptional behavior. That's where we want to build off of, taking these principles and applying it to make it easy for managers, more effective for employees. First, you want to make sure that your recognition program aligns to your business priorities. I feel like we've touched on this a couple of different times this morning already, but I can't emphasize it enough. Perhaps your organization is struggling with quality, or maybe it's productivity, and you want to reinforce how vital these elements are to your success. Designing a recognition program around measurable results in these areas, and measurable is key, and then rewarding employees who achieve the goals demonstrates that you appreciate the discretionary effort and value the employee's contributions. So think of it as setting goals. Maybe it's reducing lost product due to scrap for a quality goal, or it could be increasing throughput. Creating those goals demonstrates to employees the level that you want them to achieve, helps them to evaluate on an ongoing basis where they stand, and then it also provides managers with those facts and data points that Jeff referenced earlier that they can take into their performance reviews. A clear, easy way to evaluate employee performance and justify or show whether they are meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, or maybe falling a little short. One of the keys that we talked about earlier is that it has to be easy for managers. It needs to be incorporated as part of their daily job, daily routine, and something that's very simple. So in order to enable managers to provide continuous feedback and recognition, we recommend a few different methodologies for that. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. So first is on-the-spot recognition. That's the most direct form of recognition by a manager or supervisor, and like I said, it should be super easy. It's a way to capitalize on the recency effect by rewarding behaviors as they occur. It's a positive encouragement that employees receive on their way to achieving the major goals. Next, electronic recognition can take shape, maybe it's a form of an electronic greeting card or a note. They can be delivered by managers or peers to reinforce positive events or behaviors. And I want to emphasize here the importance of including that peer feedback. Managers are certainly busy in their day-to-day routine, and Jeff shared earlier about how our workforce is changing. People are beginning to work more in teams and rely on team leaders. So while a manager may be busy, it may be easy for them to ignore or overlook individual efforts on a project. Your peers won't miss it. They'll know who is pulling the weight, and including the peer feedback is a great way to increase the manager's visibility to performance so that then, again, when they're evaluating individual contributions, they have those data points to go back to. Lastly, social recognition. Social recognition can be used in different contexts, but put simply, is the celebration or maybe even the publication of behaviors and outcomes throughout the organization. It's a way to connect work and life. It may be as simple as sending a quick electronic card to express sympathy or celebrate the birth of a child, or it can mean publicly recognizing top achievers through news feeds or leaderboards. It allows employees to have their name in lights and to reinforce the peers or to peers the top performers or leaders that they should emulate. Before we wrap up our discussion on how recognition can support your performance review strategy, I want to take just a minute to share a few stories from companies we've worked with. So the first is a pharmaceutical company that had a quality issue. In fact, their quality was dropping so low that they received sanctions from the FDA, clearly costly to the company and really drastically could change the future outlook of the organization. Understandably, the company wanted to establish quality as a focal point among their employees and encourage the employees to take ownership of the products that they produced. To do so, we worked together to design a recognition program that communicated quality goals through program materials, encouraged and rewarded employees for raising their hands to identify a quality concern, and even established teams to identify the root causes of the issues and design solutions. Then we rewarded them for the improved results. Overall, the organization saw substantial changes in the quality of their product and even their culture, and the sanctions from the FDA were soon lifted. The next example is from the construction industry. I worked with a company who had significant issues in safety and compliance. They had higher than average lost time injuries and had too many failed roadside inspections. These two factors alone cost the company significant money every year. since OSHA discourages companies from recognizing time without an accident out of an understandable belief that will encourage employees not to report accidents, we designed a program instead that encouraged managers to recognize and reward employees for the daily behaviors that contributed to safety, whether it was wearing their personal protection equipment, cleaning up spills, reporting a near miss, or even stretching before beginning work. We also rewarded employees for passing roadside inspections. Again, you can see how we took an overall value or construct of safety and made it meaningful and real by identifying specific behaviors that the employees perform each day. Then when it's time to conduct the employee's review, managers can look back on their report of the recognition received in the past year and quickly see how the employees performed over time. Lastly, I'll tell you an example in the healthcare industry. Certainly the healthcare industry in general has seen a lot of reform over the past few years, and it's becoming more and more important to improve the patient experience and reduce unnecessary costs, such as turnover. We worked with this organization to design a recognition program to improve the culture through peer-to-peer recognition and on-the-spot recognition for managers, as well as recognizing employees for being service champions to patients. The program has been very successful. The renewed culture and increased focus has produced a 2% decrease in turnover and increased productivity. It's aligning the employees to the corporate strategy, communicating goals, and in many ways, coaching them to success through the ongoing and regular feedback. I hope you can see how recognition can be an important talent management strategy designed to encourage employees to apply discretionary effort and achieve their best, while also providing managers the coaching opportunities and specific facts to use when evaluating employee performance. And Jeff, I will turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. And I think it's amazing how much performance-based recognition accomplishes so much of what we recommended so far. So I think it fits really well with the notion of continuous, informal feedback. I also like the examples that you provided, which clearly show how outcomes can be improved. Those are some really good industry examples. I also hope that for those joining us today, you can see how recognition makes it so much easier for those managers and HR. And I say that because as a manager or a team leader, like you mentioned, Emily, you can only witness so much about an employee's behaviors. But when you have a program in which employees can recognize each other, it becomes very apparent who are your employees that are really going above and beyond. And then the recognition moments become great data points for those feedback conversations. I think there was also a question that came up. I was looking in the chat box here, and it looks like there was a question that came up around how have we solved for that lack of time managers have to recognize employees? And I think, Emily, you kind of covered very nicely how some of these programs can really enable managers without taking too much of their time. You're letting others really participate in the process and enhance that overall experience.
Agreed. So I think that the managers is certainly a big component, but incorporating the other elements, even measurable results like passing roadside inspections. Easy way for a manager not to have to touch it, but still reinforce it. And then, as you mentioned, including the peers as well. So widening the scope of people who can participate certainly helps.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So now that we have a foundation of what constitutes a successful performance management philosophy, as well as how to complement your approach with performance-based recognition, let's put it into action so that you can walk away from this webcast with some concrete steps to make a difference within your organization. So the first step is to get senior management buy-in. I'll read a statistic here. 93% of CEOs say that they recognize the need to change, yet their strategy for attracting and retaining talent, yet only 34% of CEOs feel that HR isn't ready to capitalize on transformational trends. So what I would recommend is use data like some of the market research we've provided to help you have a conversation with your senior management team. Let them know what's changing, why change is important, and really the importance of creating that engaging performance management philosophy. How do you get more discretionary effort out of your workforce? One word of caution here, certainly it may take multiple attempts. From my experience, change can be tough and it doesn't happen overnight. So convincing your senior management will likely take some time, but use the data. Use data to counter any resistance to change that you encounter. So step one is really, really important. Step two is a little bit harder than it sounds. So designing a simple process. As much as possible, really try to eliminate the form completion and focus more on the human interaction. You'll also want to think about the vocabulary that you're using as well. So one of the things that has worked for me is really changing the language from performance reviews or appraisals to check-ins or conversations. It sets a different tone. You want to try to encourage these as frequently as possible. Certainly no less than a couple times a year. I think quarterly is ideal. And these aren't replacements for the ongoing, in-the-moment recognition and feedback. Next, ensure that there's alignment to your goals and objectives. And lastly, as part of this step, provide some simple mental frameworks. We provided one earlier for you in terms of the philosophy. One that we like to use in actually helping managers deliver the conversation is start, stop, continue. So at our organization, we use start, stop, continue, and employees really like it. It's simple, it's easy to follow and keep on track in the conversation, and it's mutual. So our employees are thinking about what they can do to improve, what they think are their strengths that they should continue, and they're also thinking about their manager as well. So start, stop, continue is something that has worked really well for us and has eliminated a lot of the time that managers used to spend completing the forms. It's actually saved us thousands of hours. Step three is really about enabling those other essential components to improve outcomes. So remember that rethinking performance reviews is to achieve better outcomes. Effective communication, coaching for managers and employees, and training and development programs need to go hand in hand. We put recognition at the center because we believe a recognition program will give you that much needed transparency and visibility. And I think that Emily made that very apparent in her discussion. And then step four is educating and training your team, your managers, your team leaders. Certainly you want to help them understand the trends that are happening in the marketplace, the importance of improving employee experience. You'll want to spend time with them on the art of delivering meaningful and effective feedback. So feedback needs to be customized to the individual, considering all of the data points you have. You also want to educate managers on other aspects of performance management, such as setting SMART goals. Many organizations are moving to that quarterly goal rhythm, as I mentioned. And then lastly, keep the communication simple and easy to understand. I've found that a calendar or a timeline handout that you can give to your managers where you show the goal setting happening each quarter as well as the check-ins following suit, that can be really, really helpful. And then the last is to monitor progress and measure success. So you'll want to continue coaching your manager. So beyond the initial education and training that you do, Managers definitely need coaching around this topic. You'll also want to continue to communicate the benefits of the changes as part of change management. Don't be afraid to get creative with your communications to keep them fun and exciting. And one piece of advice, your marketing team may be able to help you with that. You'll want to monitor your key metrics, both short-term and long-term. So, for example, a short-term metric could be that you're measuring check-in completion, the percentage of managers who have done their check-ins. Long-term metrics could be around voluntary turnover and check-in completion. When I was working at Kenexa, now part of IBM, back in 2009, we actually made the shift to check-ins. And one of the things that we found, we looked at those who had left the organization voluntarily, as well as who had check-ins with their managers over the prior 12 months. And what we found was for that year, 92% of those who had left voluntarily had not had a check-in with their manager in the prior 12 months. This was extremely telling for us, and we used that data to help sell the benefit of the changes that we were making. Next, consider employee surveys to measure the effectiveness and improve the program. So those are some steps that I think will really help you, especially those that are considering making changes or have plans to do so over the next 18 months. Now let's consider some possible objections for rethinking performance reviews. And you might be thinking, well, this is all good, but there's going to be some resistance that we'll face. And let me tell you some of the most common that I've heard. The first is this won't work because we need to have forms to document everything for compliance. And my advice to you is you can balance the need for documentation with a process to ensure that managers are completing their check-ins on a given date, a given time. Managers can also work with HR to provide written summaries of any conversations that include performance issues. So there's definitely ways to train your managers the importance of documentation, particularly for performance concerns. And one of my pieces of advice as well is to make sure that you have more of the emphasis around documentation in the goal setting process, looking at what goals are met or not met to satisfy your documentation needs as opposed to the actual check-ins themselves. Another objection is around the ratings. So without formal ratings, we won't be able to pay people fairly. Managers and HR need to really partner together to review talent. As I mentioned, I think that there needs to be a clear understanding of those employees that are exceeding expectations, they're meeting expectations, or they're falling short. One of the things that I've used successfully in my career are quarterly talent trackers with our management team. And they don't have to be quarterly, but at least some way of checking in with managers around not only performance, but also diving deeper into things like leadership potential, flight risk, key areas of development. There's a partnership that can happen between HR and management to still get the data that you need to effectively execute on your pay programs. Then the last is managers don't have the time to check in with their employees on a quarterly basis. Well, what I would have to say is that my guess is that they also don't have the time to recruit talent, to replace those that leave because they're not satisfied with the relationship that they have with their manager. So it really is about making time. It's also about enabling those other programs that, like Emily described, performance-based recognition, that can get other people involved and make it easier for you as a manager. So let's talk about some of the key takeaways. It looks like we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, so I think we're doing fairly well on time. Emily took us through the importance of recognition as an addition to your performance feedback process, and the impact is substantial. It encourages positive behaviors, it improves engagement, and it helps deliverable, measurable business results. She gave some great industry examples. And in terms of the traditional performance reviews, we know that they don't work. We've said that the research shows that more frequent informal feedback is proven to drive performance. We also know that engagement levels are influenced by what employees really want. So we talked about the RESPECT framework, and we're going to have a really nice handout for you to send at the end of this session. A one-size-fits-all won't work. So we talked about the importance, especially in the manager education and training, of really teaching them to customize feedback to the individual. Next, making sure that performance-based recognition is a part of your philosophy. And then lastly, I think this is key. Simple is better. I know that was one of our steps in the 5-step process, but simplicity really is important. I think especially as the workforce changes, simplicity is definitely respected by a lot of employees today. With that being said, Tyler, I think that we have time for a couple of questions, and I'd love to tackle those.
Sure, Jeff. The first question for you. Is it worth looking at technology providers that specialize in performance management solutions?
Okay. That's interesting. So I was recently at HR Tech in Chicago, and I actually saw a lot of companies emerging that are specializing on elements of the performance management process. So for example, goal setting or check-ins with employees. I saw technology that really focused on certain pieces of the performance management process. And actually, for some companies, that was all that they really did. They specialized in those pieces. So I think that obviously the size of your organization comes into play when answering this question. My general advice is to make sure whatever solutions you're looking at can help drive your total engagement strategy. So rather than looking at something that narrowly focuses on performance management, my advice would be to think about the bigger picture in terms of a total engagement strategy in evaluating those providers. So I hope that helps.
Great. And one more for you, Jeff. What's a reasonable amount of time to implement a new process?
Oh, wow. Good question. I think it really depends on the organization and your culture. With that being said, I don't think 6 to 12 months for you to start kind of realizing success is out of the question. Certainly it takes, especially if you're moving to a quarterly rhythm, it's going to take at least a couple of quarters for the organization to get into the rhythm, not to mention the preparation that you have to do through some of the steps that we've outlined. So I think that certainly that 6 to 12 months range is not out of the question. And for some organizations, especially those larger organizations, it may take even more with some of the stakeholder buy-in that you have to do, and some of the other steps that we mentioned. Great. Well, I think we're just about at the top of the hour, Tyler. So thank you for those questions. And Sylvia, I think we'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much to our presenters and to Engage2Excel today for this very informative webcast. And just a reminder to our attendees, if you attended the live webcast, you'll receive an email from HR.com with your certification credit information within 1 to 2 business days. And if you're watching this from our archives, your credit information will be placed in your account when you click on the button at the end of the webcast that says Redeem Your Credit. That's for the archived webcast. We value your feedback, so please take a moment to fill in the final evaluation survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. And also, if you have any further questions, or if there were questions that we didn't get to today, those will be answered to you privately. So please do submit more questions if you have any. This concludes our webcast, and thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.